Ah, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the seventh Zwaardkring live stream.
Are we already 7 episodes in?
We're already 7 episodes in. It's amazing that we've managed to hold on this long.
It is.
On my camera.
Without getting banned or anything.
Right? There we go. So, yeah. Greetings, everybody, and welcome to the Malaysian Zwaardkring Malaysia sword stream, HEMA stream, basic lessons thing that we do. Hi, my name is Sasha, and I am joined on my left by Farhan. For those joining in, we are the instructors for Zwaardkring Malaysia, the best and only HEMA club in Malaysia.
Emphasis on only.
Emphasis on best.
By default, yes.
Well, best kind of correct is technically correct.
Yeah. Oh, Ryan's in the chat.
Hi, Ryan. Thank you for joining us. I understand Gregory is in as well. So yeah, thanks for joining us, and let us get started. Let's do our greeting. Feet in an L, sword down. Bring us over. Say grüß dich. I don't know. Did I ever explain why we greet this way? I'm sure I did.
You did not. You just said that we do.
Did not? Shame on me.
Don't recall this?
Okay, so the idea is that not a lot of tradition survives from Germany in German manuscripts, and since we don't have the master to student to master, transfer, and that most people learn HEMA either by picking up a sword or joining a club or reading the manuscripts. There's not a lot of tradition. But one of the things that does survive is the way of greeting, where you hold your sword down and then you bring it up like this, you see. And what you're actually doing is you're showing each other the length of your sword, which is an advantage you would never give away in an actual fight. Like if I for sure wanted to kill you, and I wanted to keep every advantage that I want. I want to keep my sword pointed at my opponent in such a way where my opponent would have a hard time judging the length of my blade. And this gives me an advantage because if my opponent can't judge the length of my blade, they can't judge the distance they need to be at. So then I can sneak within distance, and I can launch a surprise attack from where my opponent thinks, oh, I'm far enough away, but when in fact he isn't.
So Rian is saying that we have already spoken about this.
Dang. We have a super fan who knows our streams better than we do. All right.
Not surprising, though.
Not surprising, though. Then this is for anybody who's just joining us. I feel I am slanted on my camera. Farhan, can you confirm?
You are slightly slanted.
Slightly slanted, am I?
Yes.
Let's fix that for a moment. How about now? Pretty centered. This looks better.
Still slightly slanted, but less than before.
Less than before. Okay, fine. One more time. Can't do too much. This has got to be it, right? Else we'll have to manage with this. All right.
Yeah, this is good enough.
This is good enough. Okay, so last class we talked about the Zornhau and Zornort, and we wafered on about some technique from Hangen that we figured where you could do it in one move. It's not described in the manual, by the way, if you were wondering. That's just what we found, and that's totally unofficial HEMA from the Zwaardkring Malaysia. So yeah, Zornort and Zornhau. And today we're going to move on to basically what we call grade 2 materials. Like we've done basically everything what the Zwaardkring considers the lowest grade. And we're going to move into the theme for the next few classes, which is maintaining initiative. So it might be wise that we revise initiative just for those people who are just joining us at the maybe it's the first video that you see, or maybe on YouTube, or maybe there is somebody else who joined us who would like to learn more about sword fighting. So yeah, there were three kinds of initiative. That was voor, nach, and indes. And within HEMA, it's always uttered that you will want to be in voor, and if you can't be in voor, be in indes. And only if you can't be in either, then you have to be in nach. So what does that mean? Voor means before or first. And that means that you're the one making the attack. You're the one closing with your opponent, and you're the one forcing a reaction out of your opponent. Whereas nach is the opposite, is where you are reacting to an attack of your opponent. Your opponent has taken the initiative, has started his attack, and you have to react to that. Then finally, you have indes, is where your opponent launches an attack, and you move at exactly the same time. Indes therefore means in between. Ringeck calls indes the moment of opportunity, which I would agree with for several reasons, but I prefer to fight in voor. It's always been that whenever you do sword fighting, it becomes a game of your speed or the attacker's speed, so whoever takes voor, their attack speed versus the reaction of your opponent. This is what bothers me about a lot of other martial arts. So this is a personal tangent, but a lot of martial arts focus on defensive fighting, like reacting, counterattacks, that sort of stuff. And I'm not a big fan of that, because while the techniques are super cool and undoubtedly effective, they always rely on you being just as fast or faster than your opponent. And with the natural reaction speed of people, which is like, even at its fastest, is like 0.3 or 0.2 seconds, you're always lagging behind. Heck, if I have 200 ping in a shooting game, I will rage a lot, right? But we have a real life ping of about 200 milliseconds that it takes us to react on an attack. And I've been hit in sparring with attacks that I did not see coming because they were just faster than I was able to parry. So, and I've hit with attacks. I've hit people with attacks that were faster than they realized and that they were able to parry. So, I prefer, at least the German sword fighting style prefers to fight in voor. Sure, Indes is the moment of opportunity, but voor is where you want to be. But you don't want to be reckless, right? You don't want to go straight in, right? That's where we got the superior attack. I've covered that in a previous class. I wanted to touch on really quickly why Indes is the moment of opportunity. You know why that is a moment of opportunity, Farhan? Why they call it that?
I do not actually know why they call it the moment of opportunity.
This
is one where you got me.
All right. The old master still knows a thing that the young master doesn't, although I'm sure that if I start talking, you will immediately figure out what I'm talking about. The idea is commitment. Your opponent is locked in, is committed to one attack. And with that, he will be unable or less able to parry anything that you do, right? Consider the Absetzen for a moment. Absetzen was the counter thrust, right? So if my opponent stands with his sword forward and I try the Absetzen, I totally could. I could push his sword aside and thrust in. However, because he is static, because he is not moving, as soon as I make blade contact, he can start fueling, and then he can parry it by going into a sloping parry or a hanging guard, which is the best way to parry this kind of attack. Or he can wind me, and then, so what is that? Is that as I am thrusting, he can bring his sword up, and then push me aside, and then thrust at me, or I practically run into his tip. So if I do Absetzen as a technique in voor, doesn't mean that it doesn't work, but I am committed in my attack. And he can, since he is static, he's resting, he can react to me. However, this changes when he is thrusting at me. If I do the attack while he is doing an attack, he is thrusting toward me. He is locked into that movement. His mind, his focus is on thrusting at me. If I do upsets and then, he is moving towards my sword, and he is less able to parry my attack because his focus, his attention needs to shift from attacking me to defending against my attack. And since Afzetten is a superior attack where I both defend against his thrust and attack at the same time, I will have a clear advantage. So Indes is a moment of opportunity because he is locked into his attack. His momentum, his movement, his structure is all focused on making his attack a successful one. And if I place the right counterattack at the right moment, it becomes increasingly difficult to defend against that. Whereas from a static position, it's much easier to move and react to my attack. Right? Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually it does.
Funny enough, Capoferro also makes mention of this. I should pick out my book. I have a translation of the Grand Illustro, which is basically a fencing manual from Capoferro, and he has this really weird say. It's like when he is moving, I should be static, and when he stops, I should move, or something like that. And the idea is also related around this idea of like attacking and vulnerability within movement. So yeah.
I'm just surprised you got that book back. I thought it was lost forever.
Yes, I have that back. Honestly, I have no idea where it is. I think I have it. James might still have it.
Oh, James might have it. Okay. So shall we start today's actual lesson?
Yeah, so let's start with today's actual lesson. Last time we did the Zornhau, and I wanted to start from there. Right? So, because the Zornhau was the cut of wrath, where I step to the side, cut in, practice my Ansätzen, and then I thrust for my Zornort, if I got that far. But if my opponent also does Zornhau, Zornhau, if my opponent also does Zornhau, then the whole idea of Zornhau is that I get that line advantage in, right? But if he steps forward, he steps to the left, we end up in this more or less equal bind. There's this bind where neither of us has the advantage because I tried to gain line advantage by stepping to the right. He tried to gain line advantage by stepping to his right, and that cancels each other out. So what you end up with is in this guard where neither of us has the advantage. Usually the guard ends with sort of the middle of your sword, not quite the strong, not quite the weak. At his, not kind of strong, not kind of weak. So in the middle, the middle of my sword in the middle of his sword. And you get this very classic, like, I can't directly attack him. Like, I can thrust, but you'll see my thrust misses. And if he thrusts, you'll notice that it also passes by my head. So from here, we need to do something else. This guard, by the way, this position has a name, and it's called Sprechfenster, which is German for speaking window, like a McDonald's takeout.
Like a drive-through.
Like a drive-through, yeah, like a McDonald's drive-through,
yeah.
Right? Where the blades cross, it creates a sort of V through which I can see my opponent's face. Right? So it creates a V through which I can see my opponent's face. And because neither of us have the clear advantage, neither of us are making continued attack, and we are speaking to one another. And we are speaking with our swords. Last time we explained this was fühlen. We are feeling each other out. Is he pushing against my sword? Is he weak against my push? Can I push through him? Is he moving his sword? I can all feel that through it. If he's not doing anything, right, if he's simply in the bind, or if I'm faster, I see, because right now initiative resets, right? So I think, oh, I'm Vor, I'm going to attack him, or maybe he thinks he's Vor and he's going to attack me with Zornhau, and I practice Indes, or he practices Indes, where we both attack with the Zornhau at the same time. But as soon as we hit this guard, it's sort of reset, because we're in such a neutral position. There's no clear advantage or disadvantage. So from here, there's actually a number of techniques that we can do, and we're going to discuss all of these techniques over the next few weeks. The first technique that we're going to practice is Abnehmen. Abnehmen, because there's a number of ways that we can deal with this bind. The first one is called Abnehmen. And Abnehmen simply means taking off, as in I'm taking my sword off my opponent's sword. Like so. I raise my sword up so that my tip slips past his point, and then I can attack him over the other side. So what you get is I attack with attack 1 Zornhau, but since he steps to the right, we are equal, and then I take my sword off and attack him over the other side. Now, important with Abnehmen is it's not just cut over left, cut over right. Right? I am not just cut 1, cut 2. Right? There's a little trick of when Abnehmen is most successful. First of all, I'm not taking my sword off by simply pulling it back. Right? I'm not simply pulling back and then attacking over the other side. Because when I pull back, he can feel that. He can feel that I'm reducing pressure with my sword in order to attack over the other side. And if he's practicing Ansetzen, right, if he's practicing Ansetzen, he has a slight push against my sword, and as soon as I pull back, there's a sword in my face. Now I'm stepping to the left, okay, sure, but that's the second movement. Like my first movement is taking my sword off, so that's the second movement. So if he's fast, he can just straight up thrust me in the face, especially if he's still practicing Zornhau. I don't want that. I don't want to get stabbed in the face. So what I do is when he's pressing slightly, I'm pushing slightly back, and I'm bringing my sword up like it's maintaining contact all the way. So from here in the middle, I raise my sword up, maintaining contact all the way until I reach his tip. Only then do I take my sword off his sword. Right? And what this means is that the fühlen stays more or less the same. He can still feel what I'm doing, but it's more close to where we were. And if he continues pushing, what you get is that as soon as that pressure is released, as soon as my sword leaves the bind, his sword, like if he's still pushing, his sword will sort of flip past me. Because rather than gradually removing my sword, it's all the pressure of my sword is removed at once. So his sword will push forward, past me, hopefully. I step to the left. And then I immediately want to bind again with his sword over the other side. Right? I want to cut a Zornhau over the other side where, again, I can cut. And because his pressure is, his sword is moving to my right, his left. Right? I can immediately push him. I can immediately cut him to the side. So it's much more than just cut 1, cut 2, right? Cut 1, or Zornhau, raise your sword up, cut over the other side. Here, catching his sword hopefully in your cross guard. So 1, and then 2. Right? And you should be able to align your sword immediately with his neck and his sword. So I'm touching his sword and his neck at the same time. That's awfully technical. Farhan, can you add anything to this?
Yeah, I can add a small thing about the movements you're going to take. It's one thing I try to tell people on how you're going to change the cuts to make it a bit more useful for you. As you can see that Sasha is talking about, you cut a big, strong Zornhau from your right, and then once you have the bind, you slide underneath, and you make a smaller cut over your left onto the guy's neck. But one thing you note is your big Zornhau uses a big shoulder movement, but that small Abnehmen cut over the other side comes from the wrist. You kind of just push your pommel forward with your left hand. That kind of brings your tip back just enough to slip past the opponent's sword, and then you yank the pommel back towards you to make the cut. Your right arm's not doing much, except your right wrist is just rotating to get the sword in the correct position. If you're seeing that's what Sasha's been doing all this while.
So I push with my left hand, I push the pommel forward so that my sword blade angles up, and then I pull the pommel, right, like this.
Yep.
It's a push and pull motion.
Yep. Well, it's push and pull. So something to keep in mind when you're practicing this. Another thing is that an Abnehmen is sometimes very useful if your opponent starts pushing towards you, especially when you're fighting very aggressive fighters. They're just trying to shove you back with their sword, and sometimes you won't be able to pull your sword back in time, and that's when it's useful to actually shove your sword upwards to give you the room you need to cut over the other side.
Yeah, but then you move the sword with the pommel and all up, right?
Yep.
So then you move.
But this only works if the guy's like stepping in close.
Yeah. Crown. And then if you do that, then you're absolutely correct, Farhan, but if you do that, the sideways step becomes really important. That in the second cut, you step far to your left.
Oh, I was under the assumption that we agreed that the second step always exists.
Yeah. But the second step is always there, and you should, in your second step, always step to the left. But the thing is that when your opponent is aggressively closing in, if you step far to the left, you can often get behind him, right? So my opponent is closing in, and with the second step, I can like get at a really diagonal angle at him. It's really hard to show with a target dummy. It's much easier to show. But yeah, if you have an opponent who closes really quickly, and likely what he will do during closing is he will already push the swords strong against each other in this and your arms will go up, so you end up in sort of this position where you have this card is called Kroon. So Kroon against Kroon, where both of your swords are pushed up, and then you can really step sideways and cut him there.
Yep.
So yeah, when the guy charges in, this becomes a very effective cut. Yes.
Yes. Although to be fair, usually when you get a really aggressive opponent, there's a good chance your Zornhau is going to get him in the first place.
True. But that's assuming that he doesn't come in with a Zornhau.
Abnehmen is really a really simple technique. The most important thing to remember is your second cut, you're pulling away, does not use the shoulders. Do not yank all the way back. That's how you fall for knockouts.
Don't do like right that, because like we said, I've had that a few times with newbies where it's just they pull up and then they're just entirely free to do this. Farhan, what's the technique you love to do?
It depends on how tall they are. It's either Abschneiden or Handendrücken. Either way.
Yeah.
If it's a tall guy, you go for Abschneiden. You just come in underneath and cut their arms from below.
Yeah, so I reach up and then he puts his sword against my arms, and then super annoying. Yeah. Especially because I like to come in to come for grappling. So it's from here, and then cuts down here. You want to close off the line of attack by really pushing your sword towards the right of your body, right? So it's not just where here, see how my sword is on the left? I push my sword up, and then now my sword is on my right. And that's really important because then you close off the line of attack. You basically put your sword in front of his sword. So it's his sword, then your sword, then your body, in that order, and that means that he will be unable to attack you. Say Abnehmen from here, and cut there. If I do this without Ash for a moment, towards the camera. So first here, and I push my sword. I push my pommel, right? I don't raise my hands up. I don't take my sword off like this. I push my pommel so that my sword becomes vertical, and then I cut over the other side. So if you have your line, observe first the left side of the line, and then I'm on the right side. I take 2 steps. Usually the lateral steps is like 1, 2, 1, 2. But I guess if you want to be fast, you can just do up here, see, and then up. All right. So where you just take a single step to either side.
Yeah, and that's Abnehmen.
That's Abnehmen.
There's really not much to say about it.
No. Interestingly, if your opponent does Abnehmen, it's kind of hard. But they say basically just his movement will be a bit, his tempo, his movement will be a bit larger. And if you notice that he's taking his sword off, then you can immediately practice Abnehmen against him. So I cut, right? I'm pushing against his sword, and his sword slides up. So he's going to cut over the other side. So what I can do is I can just shift my body and take a right guard against him. And since my movement is shorter, see, he needs to cut up here and then cut down there. But if I'm defending, right, he pushes his sword aside. All I need to do is just switch from one side to the other. And apparently that's just the counter to it. The counter against Abnehmen is just a mini cut over the other side. So I'm here, he raises his sword up, and then as he does that, I can sort of do a counter Abnehmen. This is what Ringeck prescribes as the official counter, which is really hard to demonstrate without a moving partner who can do the Abnehmen properly. Like
an alternative to a Abnehmen to counter an Abnehmen, I've also prescribed the Handendrücken.
True, but that's only if they raise their hands up.
No. Abschneiden is if they raise their hands up. If they keep their hands down, you hit them with the Handendrücken.
I guess you could directly attack their hands, yeah.
Yep.
Good.
Okay, so
right.
We're done. Are we done with the Abnehmen?
I guess so. I would like to revisit this once I have a living partner, but for now, an exercise what you can do, of course you can practice the technique. I strongly recommend having someone, again as usual, I strongly recommend having someone with a stick. They don't even need to move. They can just start with their stick or sword in forward, and you cross your sword halfway, right? So you make your attack, binding with the swords, and you push your left hand and push your pommel forward, right, until the swords no longer bind, and then you gently put it back in the proper attack routine. Of course, if you have proper gear, armor, helmet, and a gorget, right, your neck is very vulnerable in this this attack. Then you can sort of speed it up, where you just attack 1, up. Oh goodness, come on! Stay in your attack position. Stay in your attack position. Why does that happen every time? Okay, well, you know what, Ash, I'm gonna decommission you for a moment.
Yeah, he's dead.
Neo Ash and Real Ash, both uncooperative. Alright, so cut, you bind with the sword raised up, and then attack over the other side. Right? This is not Abnehmen, right? Cut 1, cut 2. Right? No high cuts. The first cut can come from the shoulder. Bam. Here, raise up, attack over the other side. Right? And this works best if your opponent is exerting a little pressure on your sword. Right. Anything to add, Farhan?
Not for Abnehmen. It's really not much. In the chat with Rian, we've got a discussion on the Abnehmen and how it doesn't appear in Mayer's treatises. But
oh, well, I'm not that well versed in Meyer, but it's interesting that it doesn't come back in his treatises.
So for me is that I think it falls under his concept of the changer, this changing attacks, but because Meyer loves his 1-2s of attack one side and switch over to the other side, but I've no idea why he doesn't mention the Abnehmen, unless he's folded it into the Zucken. But I'm not that well versed enough in Meyer's own stuff. I've read through the translation once, but I still need to do more research on this one.
Fair.
Yeah, there's a discussion that's going on in the chat as well. For people who are watching this on YouTube, you really should catch up on Twitch for random talk in this chat.
Right. Speaking of Zucken, or do we want to? Because Zucken and Abnehmen, I always find are sort of the same. Like they're both attacking from one side and then attacking over another angle, and they're both the same in the way that they deal with the bind. So Farhan, why don't you start talking a little bit about the Zucken, what it is, and then I'll set up Ash. Cool.
So basically, the Zucken, which depends on how you translate it, is basically the pulling, as in you're pulling your sword back. It's similar to the Abnehmen in that you're removing your blade from the bind and choosing to attack, but in this case, is if you're bound near the tip and it doesn't make sense to draw the sword all the way back for a cut, you might be positioned in a way that says, it's going to be a bit hard to describe while Sasha does this.
Give me a second, I'm almost done.
No worries. Okay, so tiny sword, parrying dagger. It's good for a demonstration. With the Abnehmen, I'm bound near the middle in my blade, the midpoint, giving me the speaking window, allowing me to cut over the other side. Against Abnehmen, I may be bound closer to the tip of my blade. This is still technically a speaking window sometimes, but sometimes it's not. Depends on the situation. But in this case, it's usually better for me to withdraw from the attack, or it's what they call pulling. It means I pull my sword back and stab underneath, or stab around the other side. Sasha will describe this in a short while.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Cool. From my experience, you're less likely to end up in a position for Zucken than Abnehmen, but that could only be because Abnehmen is a very natural thing you're trying to do with your body. It's one of the most default things you want to do with something big and heavy to swing, but the Zucken can catch people off guard. It's a really effective technique if done properly.
If done properly. So, the Zucken. So again, I start with the cut and we end up in a bind. However, I'd like to define the bind a little because there's actually a lot of different ways that your swords can bind. Just now, I was speaking about the speaking window where the swords bind in the middle, right? and neither has clear advantage. But we also know that my opponent can also bind in other places. For example, he can bind in a basic defense. And here, you'll notice that if protected well enough, and if he steps to the right, left as well, you'll notice that I could raise my sword up, but I am bound way more towards my tip of the blade. So from there, it makes more sense to pull my sword back and quickly thrust over the other side. I can maintain the bind, and just like with Abnehmen, I want to maintain pressure up to the point where my sword leaves his sword. Again, this isn't just taking off, thrusting, and thrusting again. It's not a one and then pull and then thrust kind of movement. I want to maintain blade contact for as long as possible to deny him that Fulen moment where he feels like, oh, my opponent is taking his blade off my sword, which means I need to do something. I want to delay that moment as long as you can. So I pull back my sword, pushing against his sword, maintaining contact right up to the point where it slips off. And then again, I step to the left, just like with Abnehmen, and I can thrust in another position. So yeah, Zucken. I find Zucken a little bit simpler than Abnehmen because there's no fancy wrist movement. It's just pull back, and thrust in.
Yeah, you literally can't go wrong.
Yeah. So Zucken works a little bit better if my opponent defends a little bit closer to his chest, to his person, with a basic defense, rather than attacking me with a Zornhau where we bind in the middle. Because once you're bound in the middle, once you're bound in the middle, right, you'll notice that it takes a lot longer for me, and I need to pull my sword a lot further back in order to get Zucken. Whereas if he really binds us up top, right, it's just a small movement. Right, and that's what can make a successful Zucken. I'm not saying that you can't do a Zucken from an equal bind, from a Sprechfenster, but it simply works better if he defends with a basic defense.
I find that if you're bound too far down your sword and you try to Zucken, you're just inviting your opponent to Nachreisen you in the face very hard.
Yes, he can follow up. He can follow you out. One of the interesting parts is that when you do Zucken, he can rather easily defend by pushing his sword to the other basic defense. So as soon as I do a Zucken, right, I can thrust at him. But if he shifts his sword to the other basic defense, to the other side, he can catch my sword again. But this is why the basic defenses, so hold on, let me just reposition him to the other side. Right, so I have done Zucken just now, and then he pushes me back to the other side. But then Ringeck describes this hilarious thing where it's just das noble Krieg, the noble fight, where it's basically you do one Zucken, he defends. You do another Zucken, and maybe you thrust from a low angle, and he can defend against that. But then you do a third Zucken, and you just keep pulling out and stabbing at him, and he says, like, eventually you'll get through. Right? You cannot keep defending. As long as you keep, remember the 4 basic targets, right? As long as I keep switching, high thrust, low thrust, left, right, I keep going out, and I keep poking at him, then eventually I will land a hit. So the Zucken leads in the noble Krieg. And this is the, interestingly, Zucken is the only one that Ringeck describes as being part of das noble Krieg. But the idea is that I attack, and then he defends. But I know the correct follow-up attack, and since I have 4 initiative, it's easier to keep 4 initiative. So I attack again with an appropriate follow-up attack. And he can defend against that, and I can attack again, and again, and again, and again. And if my attacks are good, if my tempo is good, then he will have a hard time seizing the initiative taking it back from me in order to attack me. And this leads me to my general experience of the first attack will miss. Whatever you do, first attack, don't count on it hitting. It might, but don't count on it. Second attack might hit if you do it correct, but the third attack is pretty much guaranteed. So if you launch a chain of 2 or 3 attacks, then you're gonna go for a long way. This is also what I see going wrong in a lot of sparring, where it's just like, hey, right? There's one attack, right? That's never going to work. If you want to commit yourself to sparring, you will want to attack in combinations, which can be Abnehmen, 1, 2. Can be Zucken, 1, 2. Right? And if your opponent defends against that, you can do Abnehmen or Zucken again. And you can combine the two, right? You can do 1, Abnehmen. Okay, defense again, Zucken. Right? I can continue with my attack. So now we have Abnehmen and Zucken to chain as combo attacks. But next week we'll look at Schnappen and Durchwechseln, 2 of my favorite techniques, especially Durchwechseln.
I think we chose 2 very simple techniques to talk about today.
I think so. I think that's good too, because I am dead tired. Not from this, but from a whole day of working and then doing this.
And the weather is not helping here.
Oh God, it's like 35 degrees or something like that at night.
You're off by about 3 degrees.
38?
I think it's closer to 38, 37 right now.
Damn. So we're gonna leave it at this. So 2 exercises just to finish up.
Sure.
2 exercises that you can do. You can practice Abnehmen and you can practice Zucken. Abnehmen, just to revise, cut, raise your sword up, cut over the other side. Your first cut comes from your shoulders, nice big cut. Your second cut comes from your wrist by pushing and pulling your pommel. Step right in your first cut, left on your second. Zucken is where you cut. He binds close to the tip, so you can pull back, lean down, and thrust in. Right? It is a direct pull. From here, I can directly pull back to my hip, step to the left, and thrust in high. If he defends that, we can engage in this noble Krieg, the noble fight, the noble war. I can keep Zucken left and right, high and low targets until I break through his defenses. Practice these 2 things. One last thing I wanted to mention was that the quizzes link down here, I think. Did I make it invisible? Yeah, the quizzes link is still there. It's still active. So if you've watched lessons 1 through 5, you can test your knowledge and see what you remember down there. It will be up until tomorrow, I think. Other than that, I have nothing more to add. Farhan?
So, hold on. Okay. I was just checking the chat for questions. Faris thought we were going to continue with Duplieren tonight.
No.
So Duplieren
will be next week.
Yeah, Duplieren is a slightly more complicated concept to talk about because there are variations in it. So we are not doing Duplieren tonight. Aside from that, there was a discussion on the Zucken with Rian again about the difference in Meyer. Meyer teaches a very different Zucken. So if you're reading Meyer text and you see something completely different from what we just described,
I would love to know what Meyer says.
Your misunderstanding, that's not us. Is we are doing Sigmund Ringeck's treatise, and Joachim Meyer had a completely different understanding of what this meant.
I would love to know what Meyer says about Zucken.
I believe he turns it into a cut of some sort.
So, Rian, maybe you can join us on the Discord and tell us the difference there.
Yeah, Rian, we would love to hear from you and discuss this a little bit more because I've read Meyer's thing, but I cannot possibly understand it.
So yeah, we have not done enough study towards Meyer to make a reasonable comment on that.
Yeah.
Other than that, I think we're about done.
Yeah, it's a short stream tonight. Just get what we need to.
Okay.
If there's any more questions, just let us know. If not, we will see you next week, I guess.
All right, let's greet off then. So again, our feet in an L, sword pointing down, and then raise it up. Say the magic words. Christi. Thank you everybody for joining us today. And we will be back next week with Schnappen and Durchwechseln.
Oh, Durchwechseln, one of my favorite techniques.
I love Durchwechseln.
Oh,
all right. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. See you next week then.